morning and welcome to today's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California. I'm Dr. Karen Philbrick, Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute, a university transportation center. Our mission is to increase mobility for all by improving the safety, efficiency, accessibility, and convenience of our nation's transportation system. Through surface transportation research, technology transfer, education, and workforce development, we help create a connected world. Before I begin my formal comments, I would like to welcome the Mineta Transportation Institute trustees who have joined us today. We have John Flaherty, Senior Fellow from the Silicon Valley American Leadership Forum. We have Rose Gilboa, Board Member for the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board. Bradley Mims, Chief Executive Officer of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials. Abbas Mahadis, Chief Operating Officer and President of Econolite Group. Jeff Morales, Managing Principal for InfraStrategies. Dan Smith, President from Capstone Financial Group. And of course, the comments would not be complete without welcoming our Emeritus Executive Director, Rod Diridon. Thank you for being here. Please now make sure that all cell phones, PDAs, and other noise-making devices are turned to silent. Today's program, Paving the Way to a Better Future, the implementation of Senate Bill 1 funds, is sponsored by the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. Before we begin, we'd like to tell you about some exciting Commonwealth Club programs that are coming up. This Monday, on June 25th, Max Brooks, that's Mel's son, a fellow at West Point, will be discussing Star Wars and how it explains modern military strategy. On June 28th, we'll have ABC's Spencer Christian in conversation with Dan Ashley, discussing racism, chasing hurricanes, and significant gambling addiction. And finally, on July 9th, we'll have former CIA officer Malcolm Nance offer his take on Russia and its impact on democracy. For more information about Club's programs, please visit thecommonwealthclub.org. If you're not yet a member of the Commonwealth Club, today's a great day to join. If you have questions, staff will be on hand to talk with you during the break and after the program concludes. Now on to today's program, which consists of 3 parts. Laurie Berman, Director of Caltrans, the California Department of Transportation, will deliver keynote remarks and take questions during the first hour. Following that presentation, Dr. Asha Weinstein-Agarwal, Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute National Transportation Finance Summit, will present the results of the 9th year of a study exploring national support for increasing federal transportation revenues through gas, mileage, and sales taxes. This presentation will be followed by our panel of experts discussing how Senate Bill 1 funds are being implemented and documenting strategies that state, regional, and local governments and transit agencies are taking to address California's transportation needs. As many of you know, Senate Bill 1 provides the first significant, stable, and ongoing increase in state transportation funding in more than 2 decades. And we look forward to receiving concrete examples of how these funds are being implemented. That was a pun, concrete examples. So, you will find question cards on your seats or in the seats adjacent to you. We'd be pleased to collect your questions, and they will be asked from our moderator of Laurie Berman during the Q&A period. During the second half of today's program, we will also collect your questions. And now to begin the broadcast portion of today's program, it's my pleasure to introduce Mineta Transportation Institute trustee, John Flaherty, who recently served as Distinguished Service Professor for Carnegie Mellon University. Many of you may know John for his significant contributions when he served as Chief of Staff for the Honorable Norman Y. Mineta when he was Secretary of Transportation. John has been at the intersection of transportation and technology for over 3 decades, with experience in both the public and private sectors. His tenure in government includes chief of staff positions in the executive and legislative branches and for Republicans and Democrats. His private sector experience includes senior positions at well-known Washington, D.C. public affair firms and in a Wall Street private equity firm. Before moving to California in 2017, John managed a public policy graduate program at Carnegie Mellon University. Now please join me in welcoming John. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you again on Saturday.
Good morning and welcome on this beautiful day to today's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where we're in the know. I'm John Flaherty, as Karen said, your moderator for today's program. Today's program is being sponsored by the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. Our topic today, the funding of California's transportation infrastructure impacts every one of us. The need to invest in California's transportation system is dire. And after years of seeking a solution to the state's transportation crisis, the state legislature passed and the governor signed Senate Bill 1, also known as the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017. It increases transportation funding by $54 billion over a decade. SB 1 provides the first significant, stable, and ongoing increase in state transportation funding in more than 2 decades. Estimates are there is nearly a $140 billion backlog in deferred maintenance on our highways, bridges, local streets, and roads. While the funding crisis is widely recognized, solutions are difficult to come by. Today, we will look at various strategies that state, local, and regional governments, as well as transportation agencies, are taking to address our transportation needs. MTI will also present the results from the 9th year of a national opinion poll on various tax options for raising federal revenues for transportation. To address this subject and its related issues, I'm pleased to present Laurie Berman, the Director of the California Department of Transportation, also known as Caltrans. Director Berman is actively engaged in the implementation of SB 1, the Road Repair and Accountability Act, and Caltrans' efforts to deliver SB 1 projects and rebuild California. Since she started at Caltrans in 1983, Director Berman has held several positions, including Acting Chief, Deputy Director, San Diego and Imperial County District Director, and Senior Transportation Engineer. As a side note, it is important to add that in 1983, when Director Berman graduated as a civil engineer, less than 7% of the civil engineer graduates were women. Director Berman has long been an integral part of a statewide leadership team here in California. She shares the vision for a future state transportation system infused with innovation and new technologies that will provide truly multimodal options to efficiently move people and goods across California. Please join me in welcoming Director Laurie Berman.
Thank you. Good morning. I am really tremendously honored to be here and looking forward to sharing some thoughts with all of you. First, I want to thank the Mineta Transportation Institute for its research, education, technology, and workforce development programs. First, I'll tell you a little bit more about me. I am the new Caltrans director, but I'm not new to the department. I started at Caltrans 35 years ago as a junior civil engineer after graduating from Michigan State University, and I worked in various divisions and locations around the state. And then 24 years ago, I was fortunate to move to San Diego to head up the seismic retrofit design for that region. And when that was complete, I spent what felt like a lifetime, but was really only about a dozen years, working with our private sector partners to deliver the state's first P3 or public-private partnership project, the South Bay Expressway, also known as the 125 South Project. The last 8 years, I was the district director in San Diego and Imperial counties, where I worked closely with our partners, both local government and environmental resource agencies, to build big and complex projects, which none of us could deliver if we were just working on our own. I also had the entire California-Mexico border in the district, and that required partnerships with local, state, and federal government agencies in Mexico, which was a very unique and enjoyable part of my job. And today, I want to tell you about some of the work we've done in San Diego to give you a sense of where the department as a whole is going. And then I'll spend the bulk of the time discussing the state of and the demands being made on our aging transportation system, and share with you why I believe SB1 funding is absolutely critical to California's future. As an advocate for innovation and technology, I am proud that San Diego was one of 2 sites in the nation to develop and operate an integrated corridor management system, or ICM. We worked in partnership with local agencies to reduce corridor congestion by managing city streets and highways as a single unified network rather than as individual networks. So if there's a slowdown on one part of the corridor, travelers are diverted to another. If there's an incident on the freeway, travelers are diverted to surface streets. This has helped us to build a unified transportation system to improve mobility and maximize system efficiency and reliability. I'm also really proud of the work that Caltrans has done on the I-5 San Diego North Coast Corridor project, which broke ground last year, and that will improve all modes of transportation and enhance the environment on 27 miles of highway that connects the cities in the northern part of San Diego County. I-5 is one of the most traveled highways in the nation and connects to the national highway system linking to Canada and Mexico. In San Diego, it also connects locals and visitors to 6 lagoons, to world-renowned beaches, to employment centers, including the high-tech and highly congested area known as the Golden Triangle or Sereno Valley, as well as University of California at San Diego and Camp Pendleton, both of which are huge job centers. And the I-5 connects many communities as well. And this corridor is emblematic of our entire system. It was opened in the late 1960s, and we just have not made the appropriate investments since then. However, as the population has grown, the congestion on I-5 is predictable only in that the travel times are always unpredictable. Uniquely, the congestion on the weekends is even worse than on weekdays. And this project, which we built as an entire corridor, demonstrates how multiple benefits can be achieved when you take a holistic approach to managing a transportation corridor, which includes all modes as well as environmental mitigation. So this project, which started as an idea to add some carpool lanes and maybe a general purpose lane, has become a project which serves better bike and pedestrian access to the coastline. We are double tracking several segments of rail to improve those times on the coaster. We're adding carpool lanes, and most notably, we were able to improve the health of the lagoons, which allowed us to obtain a coastal permit for the entire 27-mile corridor. And having worked at Caltrans for a long time, I don't usually tell people we did more than mitigation. We are actually improving the health of the lagoon. Also on this project and several others, we were able to tap into SANDAG, the San Diego Association of Governments, their advanced mitigation program, and that combines environmental mitigation for multiple projects. This has saved us time, resources, and money. And the idea of an advanced mitigation program is now included in SB1 to allow the state to realize these same efficiencies. So that's a little bit about what we've done in San Diego. Now I want to talk about transportation, the state of transportation. We can all agree that our state's transportation system is a critical asset that drives jobs, trade, and enhanced competitiveness. Californians drive more than 350 billion miles a year, more than any other state, and our transportation serves a $2.2 trillion economy, an economy that is now the 5th largest in the world. But did you know that most of our transportation system was built in the 1950s and 60s when California's population was just 10 million? Now our population is nearly 40 million, and is projected to be 50 million by 2050. All of these people are relying on us to maintain the more than half a century old system so they can go about their business, taking their kids to school, driving to work, getting to the doctor's office, and delivering goods to market. The transportation policy, decisions, and improvements we're making today will affect them now and well into the future. And we know there will be more people and more trucks on the roads in the not too distant future. In 2015, nearly $2 trillion worth of goods traveled on California's roads. What's impressive is that our more than half a century old system supports 40% of our nation's imports. In 2045, the worth of goods on California's roads is expected to double to $4 trillion. Think about what the roads will be like then if we don't do anything now. The consequences of not properly investing in our transportation infrastructure are real and serious. It's going to mean slower production and delivery of goods, more congestion, more impatient drivers. It will put the brakes on our mobility and degrade our economic competitiveness as a state. Fortunately, in 2017, Governor Brown signed Senate Bill 1, the Road Repair and Accountability Act, to restore the purchasing power of the gas tax and provide a more stable source of transportation funding with strong accountability measures. Before passage, the state gas tax hadn't been raised or adjusted for inflation since 1994. Now, just to jog your memory, in 1994, it cost $4 for a movie ticket, and rent in a lot of places, I don't know about the Bay Area, was about $530 a month. So imagine trying to pay your bills today with what you were earning nearly 25 years ago. Before SB 1 passed, California state highways and local roads faced $137 billion in deferred maintenance needs over the next decade. SB 1 will generate $54 billion over the next 10 years to be split between the state and our local partners, and this revenue is necessary to bring our roads, bridges, and critical infrastructure up to today's standards. These transportation dollars double the money available for state highways and local roads and add substantial new funding for transit and intercity passenger rail. It also prioritizes funding for easing congestion along state highways and supporting our freight economy by investing in key infrastructure improvements. The bulk of our efforts are dedicated to the state's most pressing transportation challenges, fixing roads, bridges, and drainage systems, and traffic management devices to reduce congestion. Caltrans is committed to fixing more than 17,000 lane miles of pavement, 500 bridges, 55,000 culverts, and 7,700 traffic operating systems, such as ramp meters, traffic cameras, and electronic highway message boards. SB 1 also established strong performance measures to gauge our progress and created oversight and financial accountability. New revenue generated under the Road Repair and Accountability Act are dedicated for transportation use only. The taxes generated from fuel were already protected, and earlier this month, voters approved Prop 69, ensuring new vehicle registration fees would also be used for transportation only. To ensure SB 1 funds are spent properly, Governor Brown appointed an Inspector General over SB 1 funds, and the California Transportation Commission has additional oversight over how that money is spent. SB 1 provides drivers with many benefits at a relatively small cost. The Department of Finance estimates that each motorist will pay about an additional $10 a month due to SB 1. This funding will give Caltrans and local communities an opportunity to catch up on years of unfunded maintenance and work to keep highways and local roads in a state of good repair. All this work is going to improve our economy and our quality of life. At Caltrans, we have been hard at work since SB 1 was passed, starting and finishing several projects that were originally planned for years down the line. So far, we have started and completed work on nearly 20 projects, awarded or started construction on more than 100 projects, while also expediting the design and environmental work on nearly 200 additional projects. SB 1 is making a difference in your community and many more across the state. In May, we finished a $1.7 million project to resurface 7 miles of I-5 between 605 and Washington Boulevard in the Los Angeles area. We also started a $55 million project in May to replace 104 lane miles of I-880 pavement from north of Fremont Boulevard overcrossing to High Street in Alameda County. This month, excuse me, this month, right here in San Francisco, we have an $800,000 bridge project which will revamp 4 bridges on US Highway 101. In our more rural counties, we will begin a $14 million project this July to repave 90 miles of I-5 from the Glen to Hama County line to Red Bluff. We are also widening traditional highway striping statewide from 4 inches to 6 inches for greater visibility. And that's going to be done on State Route 99, Highway 101, I-5, 10, 15, and 80. And as I said, that will improve the visibility and the safety for the traveling public. We are on target to complete all the striping projects by March of 2019. Well, there is a good deal of construction going on now. Many of the projects benefiting from SB1 are major maintenance projects, and those can take years of design, study, and planning. One of our challenges is to assure the public that the work to develop projects is happening now, even though they don't see it out on the roadway. So that's why the state created the SB1 website, rebuildingca.ca.gov, so the public can see what we're doing with their tax dollars. And there's an interactive map if you want to see what's happening in your community. SB1's scope, however, is larger than just our highway maintenance projects. Over the next 10 years, SB1 will modernize local transit, improve trade corridors, reduce congestion, and fund badly needed highway, bridge, and drainage repairs. Just last month, the California Transportation Commission allocated $2.7 billion for 3 new programs: the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, the competitive portion of the Local Partnership Matching Program, and the Congested Corridors Program. That's a lot of programs. What these projects are going to do is tackle congestion, support our valuable trade corridors, and bolster local agency efforts to invest in their transportation infrastructure. And we'll see these projects come to fruition as we move forward. SB1 also requires us to pursue innovation and technological advances across all modes of transportation along the system. It allows state and local transportation agencies to create a modern, equitable system that includes safe pedestrian crossings, bike routes, and transit elements that provide access to all users of all ages and abilities. SB1 is an economic driver. These projects create jobs and show strong investments in our communities. Rebuilding California plans for a better tomorrow, making our streets, highways, bikeways, sidewalks, and public transportation safer, more reliable, and more sustainable in the long run. With all this investment comes added work, and in the coming years, Caltrans will hire new workers to help deliver projects and also help offset a retiring workforce. Caltrans is doing a lot of hiring. In addition to Caltrans hiring, we are also looking to meet our workload need with a diverse group of contractors. We are increasing our outreach efforts to help small businesses and minority and veteran-owned businesses make connections and contract with the state. Caltrans has a big job and limited resources, so we are constantly looking for ways to connect, work smarter, and manage our assets. And that is important given the vast system we manage. Caltrans manages more than 50,000 lane miles of roadways, inspects nearly 1,000 airports and aviation facilities, maintains more than 200,000 culverts, ensures the safety of over 26,000 bridges, and funds the largest state-supported passenger rail system in the nation. To help us with all this, Caltrans has recently developed and published California's first Transportation Asset Management Plan, or TAMP. The California TAMP was the first in the nation to be federally certified, which is a huge accomplishment, and it was a huge undertaking, and now we're getting calls from all over the country asking for help. The plan developed a performance-driven approach to select and fund projects and maintain state highway system assets. It establishes a framework for performance-driven investments with clear targets and transparent presentation of today's system condition. This plan is helping us prioritize projects that meet multiple performance measures. This reduces traveler impacts since we don't have to come back to fix another part of the system in the same corridor. So we're prioritizing updating multiple system elements at each project location. The plan also moves decision-making to our local Caltrans district and gives funding flexibility to collaborate with our local transportation partners on multi-agency projects using SB1 and other tax measure funding. This is changing the way Caltrans does business to be more accountable to performance measures improving the effectiveness of projects, maximizing efficiency, and improving transparency. Each of our 12 regional or district offices now has a portfolio of projects planned for the next 10 years to define a clear path toward meeting the goals of SB1. We want to maximize our resources to efficiently manage the second largest state highway system in the nation because the work we do, along with our partners, helps support and drive the world's 5th largest economy while making California a great place to work, live, and play. In addition, we are looking for efficiencies in all areas. We are using innovative contracting tools, streamlining environmental reviews, and using new technology to manage our system and do our jobs more efficiently. Our mandate under SB1 is to save $100 million each year and to put that money back into maintenance. Our goal is to save and reinvest even more money than mandated. Now, as it turns out historically, Caltrans has implemented cost-saving measures pretty regularly, but we never shared that information outside the department. So I'm pleased that SB1 requires us to first find $100 million annually in cost-saving measures and also to share that information with the public. As we do this, we know it is important to share our successes with the public so they understand the benefits of what they're paying for and see how it is improving their local roads. They need to know that without SB1 revenues, these improvement projects will be downsized, delayed, or deleted altogether. And it is critical for the public to understand that we have prioritized our maintenance of the system over the years to fix the areas in the worst condition first. Without SB1, there is no other added funding for us to draw from. So without SB1, the projects we are talking about are impacted. In turn, the reliability of the system will be impacted. I can't overemphasize the importance of California's transportation system in supporting our economy and quality of life, and how essential SB1 is to our continued prosperity. As we put SB1 dollars to work, we will need to plan for the future and balance the needs of the present. As we plan for the future, we must also be cognizant of the impacts of climate change on our infrastructure. We continually see the impacts on our transportation facilities from fires, droughts, and floods. We only have to look at the 12-day closure of Highway 101 in Montecito this past January to consider some of the newer stresses on the system. This also highlights what happens when we don't have a reliable system. We have issues in some parts of the coastline where erosion of the roadway is a significant and growing problem. Historic rains in early 2017 caused $1.2 billion in damages to our state's infrastructure, closing 44 roadways at one point, including State Route 1, where 2 slides isolated the Big Sur area from the rest of the state for 8 months. We are planning to reopen Highway 1 south of Big Sur in late July after reconstructing the highway over 15 new acres of coastline that was created by the Mud Creek slide last year. So to begin to understand and manage climate change, we are developing vulnerability assessments for each region of the state. We've already completed the first assessment for the San Francisco Bay Area. As our climate change vulnerability assessments illustrate, our world is changing and we need to be ready for sea level rise, larger winter storms, more frequent wildfires, and increasing temperatures. Sustainability is critical. A resilient and integrated transportation system not only offers accessibility and mobility choices, but it improves state and local prosperity. As we look ahead, we also need to balance transit, cars, pedestrians, bicycles, and trucks, as well as the rapid advancements in technology, materials, sustainability, and communication. New technology, innovations, and partnerships will be critical as we put SB1 funds into action to improve our quality of life, the environment, and the economy. So let's work together to do all we can to ensure that the path we forge today is one that truly advances transportation and mobility to create something better for Californians. So I want to close by saying most of you don't know me, and I really appreciated your attention while I've discussed a lot of the things that I am most passionate about regarding the state's transportation system. I'm also very passionate about safety, the safety of the traveling public and the safety of our workers. Safety is personal to me and the top priority for the department. There are a lot of people working on California's roads and highways right now, working hard to catch up and fix years of unfunded maintenance projects. These people all have families that they're trying to get home to at night. So as you drive through a work zone, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of them, please slow down and be work zone alert. When you see the flashing amber lights, please move over a lane if you can, or slow down as you drive through that work zone, and let's make sure everybody gets where they need to be at the end of the day. Thank you for your attention.
It's now time for our question period, and we have a number of questions from the audience here. So let's begin. The first question is, what kind of oversight does Senate Bill 1 have, and can funds be used for non-transportation purposes?
Okay, so funds cannot be used for non-transportation purposes, and that was a really important element, and I think a lot of people still have this idea that in Sacramento the funds can be taken away. They can't, and that was part of what Prop 69 assures. The other part of that question was oversight.
Yeah, what kind of oversight is?
So SB1 has an inspector general who was appointed earlier this year, Irena Ortega, and she and her team are responsible for taking a look at our programs under SB1 and making sure we are set up properly to capture all costs, and she's doing a great job helping us make sure that we're set up properly, and I welcome that extra attention.
You're the first director who's ever said, I welcome that extra attention from an IG.
Well, let me explain. I was taught earlier in my career when I was working on the P3 project to never be afraid to invite audits in at the beginning to make sure that you're set properly. I don't want to go down the road and find out that we're not capturing our costs appropriately. So I do welcome that, and she and I work really well together. So I think it's going to be very good for Caltrans to have somebody from outside the department taking a look at what we're doing.
Excellent. Second question. Much of SB1's investments seem to flow toward repair or rebuilding. What measures does the bill have to maintain satisfactory road conditions rather than simply fix a continually occurring problem? And a follow-up to that is, will Caltrans be able to achieve 98%, or what percent of can they achieve of highways in good or fair condition?
Great question. So I was before this, I was district director for 8 years, and one of my biggest frustrations has been that we didn't have the funding for a proactive maintenance program, and so it frequently felt like we were just kind of holding the system together as best we could. We just didn't have the funding to do the work that we knew would really repair the problem, and I know that the general public probably experienced that as well. And so with SB1, we can go out and actually do the real fix that needs to be done, and that's why some of these projects are going to take a little longer to get out to the field, because we're not just doing what feels like the Band-Aid approach. We're actually doing the design, we're getting our environmental permits, and we're doing the bigger fix. So that's a really important part of SB1. And SB1, well, it has several other programs in it. The bulk of the funding is for what we call the Fix It First. And because for a long time we've continued to build out the system without appropriately investing in the maintenance. So SB1 is really going to force us and help us to appropriately invest in the maintenance of the system. And again, not just the state highway system, but also local roads as well.
And it's important, I think, to discuss for a second that SB1, we call it Senate Bill 1, but it is a law passed by the legislature currently.
Yes.
And you folks are moving forward on it now. There's a political effort to repeal the law, but the reality is that the law exists, you guys, and Caltrans is moving forward on it currently, correct?
Absolutely, we are. As soon as it passed, and then we started receiving money in November, I think. We started moving ahead. There has been a huge need. We were able to really push ourselves to accelerate a lot of projects into future years, into the 17-18 fiscal year, so we can get that work out on the street. SB1, as you said, is the law, and the money's coming in, and we need to go ahead and take advantage of that and do the work that Caltrans does, which is repairing our roads.
We're in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. We have a number of questions from the audience with respect to transportation and technology. So let me start by asking, what new technology is the state looking at to improve our highway system? For example, will electronic tolling be coming to other bridges?
So electronic tolling is used in some parts of the state. I'm not sure how soon that will be coming here to the Bay Area.
And what other technologies will you be looking at? For example, how do you see public transportation and driverless vehicles and issues like that?
Sure. So the driverless vehicle question, of course, is a good one, especially here. We actually, in California, we have USDOT dedicated to or 10 autonomous vehicle proving grounds in the country. 2 are here in California, 1 here in the Bay Area, and 1 actually in Chula Vista in San Diego County. And so we are working with the private sector on, these are proving grounds that they can try out their ideas on. So there's a lot that we're doing through that and through our research group. And then we also work with TRB, Transportation Research Board, with ITS America, to stay current. And I would also note that the autonomous vehicle regulations are being handled through DMV, but we're working with them.
We have 2 questions with respect to moving goods and freight, and specifically what can be done, or looking into the future, do you see freight being moved off of commercial vehicles onto the rail system?
So that comes up a lot. At this point, we don't see a lot of, there hasn't been enough investment in freight to make that a reality.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of our audience says, after a recent trip to Japan, I couldn't help but feel that they are living in a transit future that we are struggling to achieve. But they've had high-speed rail for near 60 years, or 6 years. What proactive measures are being taken to expand high-speed rail and at a lower cost?
I don't know that that's a good question for me. But ultimately, we are working to integrate all modes of transportation in the state. So the rail plan, the state's rail plan includes high-speed rail. I think high-speed rail is obviously a really important component of what the future of transportation looks like in the state of California.
A couple of questions on resilience and planning. Given the stated need for long-term planning, especially in acknowledgement that you mentioned of climate stresses, what is Caltrans planning for adoption and resilience? Any percentage of SB1 funding dedicated to that? And specifically, what are we doing with respect to the impact of earthquakes and evacuation routes and other catastrophic events?
Sure. So Caltrans, let me start with the last part of the question. With regard to earthquakes and evacuation routes, specifically evacuation routes, we work with local first responders and law enforcement, and in the fires that we just had last fall, we work on making sure that there are evacuation routes, and we do all kinds of planning with locals to be sure that that can happen, that that's not an issue. And I think that we do really well with that. With regard to earthquakes, we have historically done really well in terms of seismic safety. Obviously in this area, you know all about that. And we need to stay on top of that. We have not had a significant earthquake in California in a long time, and we need to be sure that we continue to be ready for that. And I actually met with the Seismic Advisory Board earlier this week, and we had that discussion. So I think that's a really important thing for us to stay on top of. In terms of resiliency, SB1 funds aren't specifically set aside. We don't think of resiliency as a separate thing. We are incorporating that into the design and planning of all of our projects. We're accounting for sea level rise in a way that we didn't previously. And we're also looking at, as we see the erosion of the coastline, it would be foolish for us to continue to build in the same place. So and it's going to be costly to move some of these routes, but it doesn't make sense to keep fighting Mother Nature. So I think that was all the questions on that.
Yes. California residents and their lawmakers have taken a step forward to pay for this, but Senate bill funding is state funding, which introduces the question of federal funding. And specifically, what do you think of the current administration's plan to expand and improve infrastructure? Is it adequate? And do you foresee some federal funding coming California's way?
So, in terms of transportation funding, we never have enough. We will continue to figure out how to use our state dollars to leverage federal dollars. We continue to compete, and usually successfully, in the federal grant programs. And we'll see as we go along how the federal transportation funding package comes forward. We're very engaged in conversations about the federal funding programs.
You've been in Caltrans for a number of years. I want to return back to this question of how do you see, in terms of past administrations and this administration, is this a tougher challenge for states to with respect to the infrastructure plan, and or are there going to be opportunities in the future?
I think there will be opportunity. I'm hopeful there will be opportunities in the future. And you're talking about the federal.
The federal funding.
It's, we haven't had a strong revenue stream either on the federal or state side in a long time. So I mean, at some point we need to recognize the investment that needs to be made in our system to keep it competitive and reliable. So I remain hopeful.
Good. A reminder to our radio audience, you're listening to the Commonwealth Club of the California Radio Program. Our guest is Laurie Berman, Director of the California Department of Transportation, who is discussing the implementation of Senate Bill 1 funds. You can also find a video of Commonwealth Club programs online at the club's YouTube channel. So, there was one question, we had a question about oversight. We had a question from the audience with respect to management. Although the top Caltrans leadership seems to get it, middle managers often continue to plow ahead with some questionable projects. Will you take the lead to stop these projects, even if they have been fully approved? And I've edited some of that language.
So that's a really interesting question. I'm going to give you the long answer. Over the last 8 or 9 years, we have significantly changed course at Caltrans, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done because it shows that you continue in business. I mentioned our transportation asset management program so that we will move the needle on the condition of our system and all elements within the system. So we have the portfolio of projects that's out there. We will be looking at those quarterly to get started. So it's very transparent what we're working on. Mid-level management doesn't actually make different decisions than what the department makes. We are working with our partners on appropriate projects. And I think, and those are all come through the Transportation Commission. So all those projects are vetted out. I don't think you'll see too many projects that it sounds like somebody just decided we don't work that way. So I'm confused by the question, but hopefully my explanation allays your concerns that something different is happening.
Is the transportation crisis simply predicated on a lack of funding, or are there other factors that hinder the improvements in California transportation?
I think it's really a question of funding. I think it's a question of we just have not made the appropriate investments. I always liken it to buying a house and then feeling like you spent a lot of money to buy it so you're not going to maintain it. And then you wonder why it's falling apart. So we have an opportunity now to fix our house and make our system reliable. And if we continue to watch it fall apart, we're going to have more situations where we have to close down roads, or we are not addressing seismic safety and we have to close bridges. And those are really real concerns that we have going forward.
This is a question, I know that you're, as the director of Caltrans, you're focused on the transportation, but there's a bit of a political element here with the effort to repeal SB 1, and much of it is led by the new gubernatorial nominee, John Cox, who's currently running for governor. He wants to stop SB 1. We have a question from the audience that says, what has the dialogue been between Democrats and Republicans with respect to transportation funding in either during the campaign or after the campaign? Do you see that dialogue improving at all?
I think because Caltrans is a large organization, it's kind of an easy punching bag. I don't see the dialogue really changing. It's strange because historically, you know, transportation is something we could all agree was an important investment, and it's disconcerting to see that now that is not viewed as an important investment either.
Right. If SB1 is repealed, do we lose our ability for self-help and for federal funds, or what are some of the implications if it's repealed?
Well, that's a good question. If SB1 is repealed, the state funds will be diminished. Self-help funds will still be there, and certainly depending on the federal program and how much it leverages state dollars, we're not getting a tremendous amount of federal dollars like we used to, so I wouldn't count on federal funds solving that problem.
And you said that transportation used to be if not a nonpartisan, a bipartisan issue.
Yeah.
We have a question from the audience that says, how can we convince drivers that they should or have to pay for their roads? Or will the cancellation of SB1 affect gas tax increases, et cetera?
Well, and I think that's the question is, how do we help people understand what their taxes are paying for? That these roads don't repair themselves. It costs money. We have to hire people to do the work. It's a huge undertaking, and I think generally, and I do over my 35-year career, a lot of interaction with the public. But the public, and myself included, we want to go about our daily business and not be impacted so much by people want to get where they're going in a timely manner, and as long as that's happening, I don't think people are giving much thought to how much are they paying for the gas tax.
We're talking about motorized travel, but won't this conflict with the objectives of AB 32 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Sure, so we're also working to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through a lot of the materials that we use in our construction, and Caltrans also is working with other state agencies to improve zero-emission vehicles and accessibility to zero-emission vehicles. So we are working to put more electric chargers in public places, and so that we can have more zero-emission vehicles and continue to reduce greenhouse gases. So they don't
You
cancel
don't
each
see them
other.
in conflict.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier in your remarks that you want to maximize resources, and you also mentioned that you were a leader in one of the first, public-private partnership here in California, and yet the investment by the private sector in P3s, in genuine P3s, has been relatively minuscule, particularly here in California. Can you talk to that, and why do you think that's happened in the past, and do you see it improving at all in the future?
So I do see it improving in the future, although right now we don't have authority for P3s in transportation in California. I think that the first P3 we did in California through the AB 680 program was it was the first in the country, and it threw all the risk on the private sector and cost them quite a bit more than they expected. And I think we learned a lot from that, and I think we continue to learn from what other states are doing. But I also think that there's this idea that P3s will solve all of our financial problems, and they won't. There are appropriate projects for P3 investment, and there are a lot of projects that really don't work with P3 investment, and you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis and really look at lessons learned from other states.
Well, can you talk a little bit about that? Because again, California you currently don't have the authority for
Correct.
public-private partnerships, and yet a number of other states have, in some significant projects, leveraged private financing, and in a way that doesn't necessarily abdicate the authority of the public entity. So can you talk a little bit about California? One of the criticisms has been that the Caltrans engineering unions have gotten in the way of private investment coming in. and have inhibited that in a way that it hasn't occurred in other states.
Okay. I'll just use the 125 for example, and that was also the first design build we had in our district in San Diego. And I think a lot of the risk was, in fact, all of the risk was put on the public sector. They had to go get the environmental document complete, which was, as it turned out, was not a good risk to put in the private sector for a couple of reasons. So that was one of our first lessons learned, and I always have to say that that doesn't hold true across every project, but it was a significant issue because the environmental document took probably 10 years, and that was not something they had planned on. And every hurdle it could hit, it hit, and got delayed and delayed, but they continued to fund the development of the environmental document. When that road, so there was design build, a lot of people, I know I've heard all the stories about the engineers union stopping things. The individual engineers that work for us are not listening to their union to tell them to slow down projects or anything. So the policy side, that's a bigger issue, but once the project is in Caltrans, we move forward. So we did move forward. The way that project was set up was a little bit funny in terms of the coordination between the designer and contractor on the design build side. That's like a whole other story. When we broke ground on that project, Chula Vista, where the project was the 5th fastest growing city in the country. When we opened the project, it was one of the cities that was hardest hit with foreclosures. So it opened at the wrong time. There's a free choice, people had another option, and so they weren't spending their money on tolls. So I just actually recently spoke in DC about this kind of the long haul, the long lesson learned. And ultimately the developer went bankrupt, filed for bankruptcy, Sandag bought that, and it's now a part of the regional transportation system, and they lowered the tolls. I think that if they had opened, and it wasn't the first day of the recession, they would have had more luck. And I think if they had had enough money to look at a longer term picture, we would have come out of the recession and they would have started to make money again. But so those are some reasons why that project, some say didn't work, I say it worked as it was supposed to, the risk stayed where it was supposed to. These are complicated questions, and I think there's certainly room for P3s, but I want to really caution that a lot of people feel that's the panacea for lack of transportation funding, and it is not.
Right, thank you. We've had a couple of questions. I want to combine them into how is Caltrans preparing for the uncertainty and unprecedented rapid rate of change and disruption in transportation?
That's a great question, and it is really hard to manage today's system and be ready for tomorrow's system. So what we are doing is we're trying not to preclude things. So for instance, I mentioned the wider striping that will last longer also and be more visible at night. So that's helping today's system, but it's also going to be helping tomorrow's system when autonomous vehicles can read those lane lines. So we're doing things like that. We're coordinating with other states and with the private sector. Originally, I think we had discussions with some of the autonomous vehicle companies about what did they need from us, and they said, we're good. And then as we started talking, we opened up that discussion. So, but the challenge for us, and there's more innovation than just with autonomous vehicles. There's a lot of innovation with vehicle to infrastructure communication, vehicle to vehicle communication. We are using some of these things for to do demonstrations of truck platooning, which will allow trucks to drive more closely together, that will increase capacity. So we are looking at different things and how it impacts our road, and I think the best thing for us to be doing is to continue to stay engaged with the research so that we're not precluding what we do. What we do today does not preclude tomorrow's innovation.
In 2018, if Laurie Berman was just starting out now as a civil engineer in Caltrans, when she reaches the directorship, what sort of technologies do you think will be here at that point that are not here today? What do you think? What do you think this is headed in terms of, as one person says, the convergence and disruption of the transportation systems?
That is a great question. So look eventually we're gonna have more autonomous vehicles. I think it's gonna take longer to turn over the entire fleet than we think, but it's gonna mean that we're safer in our vehicles or whatever mode we're in. And it's gonna mean that the people out repairing the roads, because those roads are always gonna need to be repaired, they're gonna be a lot safer. Hopefully we will figure out how to manage the additional cars, which was going to create additional VMT or vehicle miles traveled, and figure out how we manage that. There's just a lot of exciting things going forward that I think it's a great time to be entering the transportation field. When I started at Caltrans, we were at the beginning of the seismic retrofit program, and so right now to be thinking about what your career at Caltrans could be like will be very exciting.
Talk a little bit about, you mentioned vehicle miles traveled there, as opposed to going up and filling up your tank and paying for what the hose says. So can you talk a little bit about that? You
Sure.
believe we're moving toward that. People are struggling with that, both from a policy viewpoint as well as an operational viewpoint. And it sounded like you thought it was inevitable. How do you see that unfolding?
So I meant a different thing by vehicle miles traveled, but what you're talking about is the road charge, which also refers to vehicle miles traveled. So Caltrans is one of several states that is looking at a road charge pilot, and that measures, because while the gas tax is great, as our cars become more fuel efficient, and that's been part of our problem, it's just not general, because the gas tax is a per gallon tax. So we're looking at a road charge that measures vehicle miles traveled. Did anybody participate in that pilot? Okay, a few of you, good. It was really simple. For me, I snapped a picture of my odometer, I think every quarter, and sent it in, and they captured that information. There was different ways to capture that information. So we're working primarily with the western states, but we also have nationwide partnerships to look at how to make this work. And there's a lot of considerations. For instance, we want to be sure that if you have a lot of property, that we're not capturing miles traveled on your private property. How do we assess that as you travel into other states, or living in San Diego, when you travel into Mexico, how do we make sure we're not capturing that? Those were important components of the first part of the pilot. Now we've recently received a federal grant to look at how would a pay at the pump type collection system work. Oregon looked at this several years ago. We have more information since then. So we're looking at it so that we have more answers and we can define a program that we think would work. We're not there yet. It's going to require a lot more. And that's another thing that people would have to get used to. A lot of people, though, I know I am charged by my car insurance company by the number of miles I travel, and I send them a picture of my odometer twice a year also. So it's not an unheard of thing.
I wanted to say we have a couple of technology questions. Do you think that Caltrans will be involved in aviation, in the sense that people will be moving vehicles to the air, along the drones? Back to the young director Berman starting out. Do you think that's going to happen in the next 25 years?
I've always wanted that jetpack that would take me in the air. So I don't know that we're going to have, we're working on a drone policy, and I think drones will help us tremendously in terms of cost savings at Caltrans. Especially like you think about after an earthquake or after a significant event, we want to be able to if we can get up in the air and see what's actually happening, that'll be helpful. For some of our bridge inspections, be able to take a drone under the bridge and look at what's going on, that'll certainly be much cheaper. So I think drone technology is here. I think there's a tremendous number of uses for it, and we're looking at that. In terms of individual air travel, I can't predict that. That's an interesting one.
Okay, well, we'll return to the ground with this question from the audience, which is a much more operational and practical question. How is your agency coordinating with local agencies to keep places like I-280, US 101, freeway traffic out of the southeast San Francisco neighborhood roads that were never designed to handle freeway volumes or speeds. And this introduces the question of, with the new technologies of Waze and Google Maps and others, there are alternative routes that are bringing traffic into roads that were not designed necessarily for that sort of traffic volume. What do you see in terms of the future of that?
So that's a really good question, and there's certainly been, a lot of the technology has been disruptive in different kinds of ways, and certainly Waze is putting traffic where it was not really intended. Caltrans isn't, we work with Waze to communicate changes in our system. If we're gonna have several lanes closed or a full freeway closure, we'll work with Waze to alert people that they can't take that route. In terms of what it's doing to neighborhoods, Caltrans is not involved in that, but I do know different locales have different ways of making sure only local traffic is on the road.
Okay. A lot of transportation projects, the criticism of transportation projects are how long they take. And that a need exists, everyone agrees on what the solution is and what the project should be. And then for a variety of reasons, including permitting, including the opportunity for local groups and for other groups to get involved and to, one side would say interfere, the other side would say have their concerns adequately represented. The result, nevertheless, is an extended line or downrange completion time. What is Caltrans doing to address those things?
So projects do take a long time to develop. The environmental process is, it's set up to protect communities and to protect the environment, and that's what it does. And it requires a lot of coordination with communities and a lot of looking at the impacts that we're creating. And I don't think that's, I agree with the frustration about how long it takes, but I don't think it's a bad thing to force ourselves or to be forced to study the impacts to the environment. I think there are some things that I'm looking to improve in terms of how long it takes to get permitting. We had a lot of success with the Coastal Commission and staff on the I-5 project that I mentioned earlier. And I think there are certain things that, there was a bill that was passed last year that requires Caltrans and local, and resource agencies, state environmental resource agencies to work together on streamlining. We're doing that. I think we're all very excited about how we can come together and solve those problems. I've told my staff, we've talked about this for a long time, that, environmental resource agencies don't have the same mission as Caltrans. Caltrans does not have the same mission as these resource agencies, but we should be able to come together and figure out how we all get what we need and do it in a timely manner. I think the advanced mitigation program that I mentioned also is going to be helpful in getting jobs permitted more quickly. And then I wanted to also mention the time it takes to actually build the project. It's really hard to build projects without disrupting the general public. A lot of our work is done at night. That's a little scary, but a lot of it is done at night. But that gives us really short work windows because we don't set up, depending on the area, we don't start setting up our, and I know this is very engineering-ish, but I'm going to tell you anyway.
Please
We
do.
don't set up our lane closures till around 9 at night, and depending on the size of the job, it may take a few hours to get it set up, and then we've got to start picking up early because generally we want the lanes reopened by about 5 in the morning. So you think about, it's just not enough time to really get the work done. So one thing we've had success with, and I know you've had this here in the Bay Area and as well as other parts of the state, is what we call the super closures, where for a weekend we say just stay away, we're going to get a lot of work done, and those work really well. They're not for every project, but those work extremely well. We inconvenience you once for a whole weekend, and then we're done. And during that time, we also take the opportunity to get other maintenance work done in the area at the same time. So we keep trying to figure out how to get jobs done and not inconvenience the people we're serving.
We have a question from the audience with respect to, are you looking at the issues that are going to happen with respect to large future events, such as the 2026 World Cup and the 2028 Los Angeles Summer Olympics. And that introduces high-speed rail and some of the things you're doing in transportation planning. Can you comment on that?
Sure, yeah, we are working with locals on, they're working with us, we're all working together on these major events. Those are like extreme major events. We have other events in each part of the state where we work with our local partners to be sure that we can accommodate things and yeah, so that planning is going on.
There's a question from our audience with respect to self-help agencies. What do you think about county transportation self-help agencies? Aren't they assuming the functions traditionally done by you at Caltrans? And don't they cause piecemeal parochial planning instead of regional or statewide focus? And are you holding them accountable, or can they be held accountable?
Okay, so my experience with self-help counties is in San Diego with Sandag, but I'm certainly familiar with the others and getting to know the other self-help counties better. I think these partnerships are critical to getting work done, and in fact, in San Diego, we put project teams together that include Sandag employees and Caltrans employees, and our goal is that our employees no longer think about who they are working for, they think about the project they get to build. And the value of these partnerships is that there's some things that Sandag can do that, or other self-help counties can do that Caltrans can't do, resources they bring that we don't have. There's expertise that we bring that the self-help counties may not have. And working together, we get really big things done. One thing that has been also very successful for us is that we don't think about if it's them or it's us, it's about who are we serving, what project are we trying to build, and how do we work together to get it done. So I look forward to working more closely with the self-help counties and the rest of California, because I've had such great experience working with the one in San Diego.
We have a question raising the issue of technology companies here in the Bay Area, and that Facebook, Oracle, Salesforce, several other, Google, several other technology companies are involved with transportation issues in a number of ways. Are you interacting with them or interfacing with them in an effort to improve congestion and to impact transportation planning? And if so, how?
So and I'm sorry, I can't, probably somebody here knows which company it has actually put money into some projects. And yeah, locally, the local district I know is working with several companies too, and we're always working with different companies to help improve transportation in their area, because it's really, I mean, part of our job is helping you get your employees to work every day. So,
Well, unfortunately, we've reached the point in our program where there is time for only one last question. I want to, and we had a couple of questions with respect to safety, and you discussed in your comments, your remarks, the importance of safety along with transportation efficiency. And I know that you personally feel very strongly about the safety of your transportation and Caltrans workers. So given my recent return to California, I have to notice that on the highways, cars have picked up their speed and have picked up their lane changes from back when I was growing up here. And those were the days of the $500 rents that you were talking about. Can you talk a little bit again about the safety of transportation workers and the need to keep Caltrans workers safe?
yes, unfortunately, we have not had a year go by that we have not lost at least one Caltrans employee. And just last week in LA, we lost a contractor's employee who was hit by a truck. It's hard to work right next to those orange cones and have live traffic speeding by you very quickly. There's no room for error. I always tell my maintenance employees I can sit in my office and make mistakes, and I can recover from those mistakes. They don't have that luxury to recover from those mistakes. And so we are always trying to remind people, please don't drive drunk, first of all, and that's what concerns me when we have people out working at night. But there's so many distracted people, and you can see them. You can see the cars slow down, and as you drive by them, you see that they're on their phone or they're texting. You can't be paying attention to where you're going if you're on your phone or texting, and so that's why we say it's very simple. When you see the flashing amber lights, you see the cones, when you're driving through a work zone, just slow down and pay attention. Because it's not just my workers. A lot of people are killed in work zone accidents or injured in work zone accidents because they weren't paying attention. Things change quickly when we're out there on the road. The configuration one day may not be the same as it is the next day. And I want to mention the safety of the traveling public also. I get notifications of every fatality on the system. There's just too many. We need to pay attention to what we're doing.
Well, our thanks to Laurie Berman, the Director of the California Department of Transportation. This program has been sponsored by the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. Thank you to our audiences here and on the radio, television, and internet. We also want to remind everyone in this room that following the conclusion of this portion of the program, our panel discussion will take place following a 5-minute recess to reset the stage. So, Director Berman, thank you again for an excellent presentation. I have listened to the Commonwealth discussion. You got through a lot of questions for our guests, and we really appreciate that. I'm John Flaherty, a trustee of the Mineta Transportation Institute, and now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you're in the know, is adjourned.